Derek Walcott is looked upon by his admirers as the greatest Caribbean poet ever. He was a gifted poet and also a gifted dramatist. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1992. We call him a Caribbean poet. We call him a West Indian poet. But we should not forget that his nationality was St. Lucian. He was from St. Lucia. It is doubtful whether any other poet has been able to voice the complexities and the contradictions, the fears and the desires, the strengths and the weaknesses, the hungers and the complexes of the post-colonial condition more effectively, more eloquently than Walcott. A Far Cry from Africa is one of Derek Walcott's iconic poems. The title is rather ambiguous. In fact, the poem itself is somewhat ambiguous. And this ambiguity is one of the tremendous strengths of the poem, one of the tremendous strengths of the title of the poem. A Far Cry from Africa. A far cry from means a long way from, a long distance from. It can also mean notably different from, significantly different from. A far cry from Africa. It can be interpreted to mean that Africa is no longer what it used to be. This Africa is a far cry from the Africa before the arrival of the white man. The Africa today has come a long way from the Africa at the arrival of colonialism. Another interpretation would be that a cry rises from the continent, from Africa, and it travels very far. It can be heard thousands of miles away. A far cry from Africa. So great is the bloodshed, so great is the tragedy, so great is the pain, that a piercing cry rises from the continent of Africa, and this cry travels far. A third interpretation would be that the speaker is no longer in Africa. The speaker is in a place very far from Africa. And that is why he titles the poem, A Far Cry from Africa. There is much that is happening in Africa. Bloodshed, violence, tragedy. The speaker observes all this from a safe distance. That is why he is a far cry from Africa. Yet another reading of the title would be that the title suggests that Africa has traveled very far. Africa is no longer confined to the continent, no longer confined to itself. The African gene has been transported immense distances away and planted in social, cultural soils of foreign lands. We meet with African blood in the United States, especially in the southern states of the United States of America, for example, in the Caribbean, for example. And you must remember that the poet himself is an excellent exemplification of what this interpretation attempts to convey regarding the title of the poem. The poem opens brilliantly. The opening stanza, the first stanza, is stunningly visual. In fact, I would say that the poem opens like a great Hollywood movie with a powerful scene which captures the imagination of the reader. Your wind is ruffling the tawny pelt of Africa. To ruffle means something is in order and you are making it disorderly. Your wind is ruffling. It's as if the wind is running its fingers through or running its hand through the tawny pelt. Tawny means brown, orange brown, pelt. Pelt is the skin of an animal along with its fur or hair or wool of Africa. Africa is presented as an animal with a brown pelt, an orange brown pelt. Pelt, as I said, is the skin of an animal along with its hair or its fur or its wool. And a wind is running its fingers through very lovingly in a rather playful manner, running its hand through the pelt of the animal which is Africa. Kikuyu, quick as flies, batten upon the bloodstream of the veld. The veld is the open grassland, the open countryside. You have streams in the veld, but the poet here speaks of blood streams, streams in which not water, but blood is flowing. And the Kikuyu, a very important tribe in Kenya, batten, greedily feed on, ruthlessly feed on, batten upon the bloodstream of the veld. We here get an overview of Africa at the time of the Mau Mau rebellion. The Mau Mau rebellion took place in the 1950s in Kenya. The rebellion, the uprising, was ruthlessly put down by the British. But the British in 1963 decided to leave Kenya, and Kenya became independent. So I will not say that the Mau Mau rebellion was a complete failure. Corpses are scattered through a paradise. What a shocking picture. Dead bodies scattered. Where are the dead bodies scattered? Not in hell, but in paradise. That's it. Africa is essentially, fundamentally, basically, originally paradise. But see what is happening in Africa, the Mau Mau rebellion, streams flowing with blood. The Kikuyu, the Mau Mau rebellion was unleashed by a section of the Kikuyu, quick as flies batten upon the blood streams of the veldt. The fly, it's very difficult to avoid the fly. If there is something interesting to the fly is bound to come there as quickly as possible. The fly is something which the common house fly, the house fly is something which cannot be kept away most of the time. Kick you quick as flies batten upon the bloodstream the veldt. They are quick as flies. The comparison is appropriate, powerful. Just as flies do nothing more than to spread disease, the Kikuyu, who are behind the Mau Mau rebellion, are also seen as creatures who are interested only in their self interest. Only the worm, kernel of carrion, cries, waste no compassion on these separate dead. Very powerful lines where the worm in the carrion, in the dead body, is presented as colonel of carrion. Colonel is an officer in the army. In India, the colonel is above the lieutenant colonel and below the brigadier. Here, the background is the Mau Mau rebellion. But in a smaller battlefield, a different battle is being fought. That battlefield is the copse, the carrion. And there, the worm is the colonel. We in life come across persons who impose their authority on others, especially in organizations like the army. But here we find a worm who is colonel of carrion. If the carrion, the dead body, is the battlefield, the worm is the colonel, enjoying absolute or near absolute authority in the thick of battle. Waste no compassion in these separate dead. What does the worm say? The worm is now an army officer, a colonel, and the worm's war theater is the dead body. Separate dead. How do we explain it? I would say that the poet has seen many a battlefield in Africa at the height of the Mau Mau rebellion, and he has discovered that the dead bodies are never properly buried. They are left to the mercy of the worm, who now becomes as powerful as a colonel in the battlefield. Waste no compassion on these separate dead. This is the opinion of the colonel. But here the colonel is the worm. Waste no compassion. Compassion means pity, sympathetic love, the capacity to understand the sufferings of others, a genuine desire to reduce the sufferings of others. Waste no compassion. That is what the worm says. Don't waste your love. Don't waste your sympathy. Don't waste your pity on these separate dead. How will we explain the term separate dead? In a battlefield, the dead lie in different places. They don't die at the same time, they don't lie in the same place. So they are the separate dead. I wonder whether there is a secondary meaning to all this. Whether the poet is trying to suggest that there was not enough unity among the Africans, among the Kikuyu. They live separately, that is not spoken of now. They live separately and they die separately. They deserve no compassion. That is the opinion of the present colonel. But the colonel is a colonel of corpses. Statistics justify. That is it. In any situation, the powerful persons, the government of the day, is able to publish statistics which justify its approach, and sometimes which even helps the effort of the person to reach the goal, which is the culminating point of the process. Statistics justify and scholars seize the salience of colonial policy. Here, the poet, in a very outstanding manner, in a very remarkable manner, throws light on the infinite gap between praxis and theory, between reality and explanation, between life and academics. The Mau Mau rebellion caused widespread destruction and death, but for theoreticians, for academics, for scholars, it is only grist to their mill. Very happily, very comfortably, in a very self-satisfied manner, in a very complacent manner, scholars use this stark reality as raw material for their erudite explications, for their scholarly discussions. They use this reality to explain to us such theoretical frameworks as colonialism, to explain to us the salience of colonial policy. Salient is a feature, in this context, a feature which stands out, a prominent feature. The salience of colonial policy. How far removed these well-paid scholars are from the destruction, the death, the bloodshed, the slaughter, the starvation. That is the raw material for their scholarly evaluations. This is what is suggested by the poet. What is that to the white child, hacked in bed, to savages expendable as Jews? What is that? All the scholarship, all the discussion, all the debate, all the analysis, all the evaluation, all the explication. What is that? To the white child hacked in bed. This is what happened in the Mau Mau uprising. A white child, innocent child, child by the very definition of the term requires love, requires protection, requires empathy, requires safeguard, And here a white child. Is the white child fighting? Is the white child violent? Is the white child angry? No, the white child is in bed. Is hacked to death. Or what does it mean to savages? From the perspective of colonialism, many of the native peoples were looked upon as savages, uncivilized creatures, expendable, that which can be expended, unimportant, insignificant, and so can be destroyed, so can be abandoned as Jews. What happened to the Jews in Hitler's Germany? They were expendable. The authorities adopted, the government adopted a use and throw policy. The poet asks, what does all this theory, what does all this discussion, what does all this scholarship mean to those who suffer acute pain and even death? The child hacked in bed, the so-called savage who is expendable, as expendable as the Jews. This is the reality. The child killed in bed, the child cut to pieces while sleeping, savages who are looked upon as expendable, Jews who are subjected to atrocities. I would like to draw your attention to the sheer brilliance with which Walcott sandwiches the statistics and the scholarship. The scholars endlessly debating the important features of colonialism, colonial policy, and using statistics to justify their conclusions. Between the worm happily feeding on the dead body, on the carrion, and the white child cut to pieces in bed, in order to highlight the absurdity of ivory tower, the ivory tower that is academia. I have to admit that I'm very much impressed by the fact that this stanza in particular and the poem in general carries out a fine balancing act. No reference to Rohingya mystery, this. Walcott makes it clear that Africa is today not what Africa was before the white men arrived. And also that to the white men, the so-called savages of Africa are expendable. But Walcott also speaks of the bloodthirsty Kikuyu, the bloodthirsty Kikuyu tribesmen who organized the Mau Mau uprising, and of the white child hacked in bed. I think one of the greatest strengths of Walcott is this ambiguity, this ambivalence, this balancing act. One is tempted, again tempted, to contrast the post-colonialism of Walcott against the post-colonialism of fellow West Indian. But I think he belonged to the French West Indies and not to the British West Indies. Frantz Fanon. You have to read The Wretched of the Earth or Black Skin, White Masks to realize the infinite distance between the positions taken by Walcott and Fanou, between the post-colonialism of Walcott and the post-colonialism of Fanou. The second stanza has an extremely felicitous opening. We meet with the hunting scene. The beaters are threshing the rushes, beating the rushes. The rush is a plant with a long, hollow stem. The plant is commonly found on river banks and in wetlands. This is a typical scene of colonial Africa. The hunters are obviously white men. The beaters are obviously the natives. I think no other scene can be looked upon as the archetypal scene of colonialism in Africa. And what is being hunted? The ibis. The ibis is a bird which was once widespread on the African continent, from the parched river to the beast teeming plain, from the river which has dried up to the plain which is full of animals, teeming with beasts. But now it has become extinct in many parts of Africa. The ibis is a sacred bird in the ancient Egyptian religion. It was worshipped as a god. The ibis is a sacred bird in many ancient African religions. The ibis symbolizes good luck, harmony, truth, purity. And I think it is. That's what ornithologists say. It is the loudest bird in Africa. The raucous cry of the ibis was once heard all over Africa. But now, as I said, in certain pockets of Africa at least, certain parts of Africa at least, it has become extinct. The ibis is an iconic bird. And what is happening here? The sacred bird, the bird symbolizing truth, purity, harmony, goodness, is being destroyed, is being hunted for game. It is being turned to dust. And I think much can be read into this hunting scene. The mass killing of the ibis is representative of what colonialism does to Africa, has done to Africa. The ibis, the iconic ibis, symbolizes Africa and its destruction and its extinction, symbolizes, represents the extinction of the spirit of Africa, the destruction of the spirit of Africa. And you must remember that the poet points out that right from the dawn of civilization, the raucous cry of the ibis, as I said, it's the loudest bird in Africa, has been heard all over Africa. What a felicitous scene. The hunting scene, the white man hunting, the native beaters, the iconic ibis being shot for game, rendered extinct. This is precisely what colonialism is all about. Derek Walcott is the great master of the balancing act. The balancing act. After giving a graphic description of the hunting of the ibis by the white man, the ibis being a wetland bird, a wading bird, which more than any other bird symbolizes the continent, symbolizes Africa, Walcott proceeds to explain that such things are natural in the world of animals. The violence of beast on beast has to be interpreted as natural law. So, what the white man is doing in the hunting scene is not something original, not something novel. He is doing what happens as as routine in the animal world, in the world of animals. But the problem is that man, very different supposedly from other animals, upright man, honest man, seemingly upright man, seemingly straightforward man, seeks to impose his dignity, seeks to impress his dignity, seeks to give himself a divine aura by inflicting pain. That is the problem. Man, supposedly upright, supposedly honest, supposedly straightforward, also inflicts pain, very much like the members of the animal world. Human beings are no different from wild animals, and they are as much interested in inflicting pain as animals are. In fact, the poet is able to see a lot in common between wild animals and human beings. Wild animals are in a state of delirium when they are hungry and when they attack their prey. Delirium is a psychopathological state in which the patient is unable to think clearly or act properly. But here it means extreme excitement. A parallel is subtly created between the wild animal attacking the prey and the white man attacking the native. Both are in a state of delirium. And you must remember that the drum, which is used in war, utilizes the hide of animals. It is out of the carcass of animals. It is out of the carcass of the dead animal that the drum is created. This gives us a clue of what is going to happen. In a state of delirium, the war takes place, and the war is fought to the beating of the war drums. The final result is the creation of dead bodies. The white man expresses courage, and the war comes to an end in peace. Of course, the white man is victorious, the natives are defeated. But the natives dread, fear, hate even that peace as much perhaps as they fear, dread, hate war, because it is a peace created by colonialism to suit the needs of colonialism. The white peace contracted by the dead and achieved over the dead bodies of those killed in war, mostly the dead bodies of the natives. The speaker's point is that there is not much of a difference from the native point of view between war, which is feared, which is hated, which is dreaded, and the peace that is the consequence of the war, which is, after all, a white peace constructed over the dead bodies of the natives. We sometimes use the term Pax Britannica, or British peace, to refer to the period of relative peace that the world enjoyed when the British Empire was at the peak of its power and Britain, the most powerful nation in the world, and in fact the global policeman. The term Pax Britannica is modeled on the term Pax Romana, a Roman peace. Pax Britannica is sometimes used to refer to not just the relative peace at the international level, but also to the peace that the British Empire brought to the regions that became part of that empire. Africa, for example. Apologists to the British Empire might speak of Pax Britannica, but Derek Walcott in this poem gives us a picture of what that peace was like from the perspectives of the ruled. The peace was a white peace contracted by the dead. It was peace, of course, a kind of peace, but it was a peace imposed by the white man, constructed by the white man over the dead bodies of those who had been defeated, mostly over the dead bodies of the natives, of the black men. And it is a peace which the native dreads. The native dreads that peace. And it is a peace constructed by the white man, created by the white man, over the bodies, over the dead bodies of those who had been defeated. This is what is praised by the apologists of the British Empire as Pax Britannica. The last answer is rather difficult, rather complex. But I think that the poet has provided the poem with a very appropriate, with an amazingly felicitous concluding stanza. A stanza which succeeds in lifting the poem to remarkable heights, to extraordinary heights. Let us try to read the stanza, line by line, word by word. The poet speaks of brutish necessity, wiping its hands upon the napkin of a dirty cause. Brutish, resembling brutes, resembling animals. Brutish necessity. What is done by the colonial power is an urgent necessity at that particular moment. And it resembles the necessity of the brutes. Brutish means like animals or like beasts. Brutal means savagely violent or naked, undisguised. This is not brutal. Of course, it is brutal. But the poet says it is brutish, resembling the behavior of wild animals. What do wild animals do? They attack their prey, they kill the prey, they eat the prey. This is what colonialism does. Brutish necessity. But the problem is we are not animal, we are human. And so we come up with a justification. We say we are doing it for a cause. That is what Putin says now. He has invaded Ukraine for a cause. Wipes its hands upon the napkin of a dirty cause. What is a napkin? A serviette. A napkin is a serviette. A square piece of cloth or paper which is used to wipe fingers, wipe lips, or protect the garment while dining of a dirty cause after eating or while eating. When our fingers become dirty, when our lips become dirty, we wipe them against a napkin, upon a napkin. We use a napkin to clean our fingers, to clean our lips, and the napkin is almost always white, pure white in color. Similarly, colonialism does something which is absolutely necessary from its point of view, because its thinking, its thought processes, its desires, its urges, its compulsions are brutish, are those of animals. But because they are human beings, they justify it by speaking of a cause. The cause is like the napkin which is used by a diner to make his fingers clean, to make his lips clean while dining. But the problem here is even the napkin is dirty. The cause itself is dirty. A strange situation in which a dirty napkin is used to clean or wipe dirty fingers, dirty lips. They come up with a justification, they come up with a cause. Exactly the situation of Putin, where even the cause is dirty. Colonialism acts in a way which befits animals, brutish, and then comes up with a justification which is as dirty as the act itself. This is something brilliant, something Shakespearean. Only Shakespeare could have written something like this. There is a Shakespearean touch here. I think we can call Derek Walcott, and you must remember that Walcott wrote plays as well, dramas as well. I think we can call Derek Walcott the William Shakespeare of the Caribbean. A waste of our compassion. We have to admire the brutal realism of the poet. Compassion means pity, sympathy, sympathetic pity. I think the word compassion literally means suffering together. Suffering together. I am reminded of the Buddha because the Buddha came to this world to give the message of compassion. And Buddhism defines compassion as the heart that trembles in the face of suffering. The heart that trembles in the face of suffering. Returning to the poem, the speaker says that our compassion is wasted because despite all our sympathy, despite all our pity, despite all our emotional involvement, we are unable to do anything concrete. And our compassion goes to waste. As with Spain, a waste of our compassion, as with Spain. When I read it for the first time, I was not quite comfortable. Where is Spain? Spain is in Europe. And what has Spain to do with Africa? But now I feel that I was wrong. This is nothing short of a stroke of genius. The poet brings in Spain. The allusion is to the Spanish Civil War. I think it is from 1936 to 1939, which ended in the ending of the, which concluded with the ending of the Second Republic and the establishment of the Spanish state under Franco, Generalissimo Franco, Francisco Franco, the fascist dictator. It was looked upon as an international tragedy at the time. A classic example of goodness being defeated by evil, of what is right being defeated by what is wrong. The poet's point is that such things happen not merely in Africa. Such things happen all over the world, even in Spain, even in Europe. Very strong parallels between what colonialism does in Africa and what Franco and his followers do in Spain. I am reminded of W.H. Auden's famous poem Spain, which discusses the Civil War, the same Civil War which is alluded to in the Walcott poem. Evil triumphs over good, and how? Let me try to read to you from memory the last two lines of Auden's Spain. History to the defeated may say alas, but cannot help or pardon. Unquote. This is precisely the point. History refuses to help, refuses any help to the defeated. I am also reminded of Guernica, the painting by Pablo Picasso, which is about the bombing of the town of Guernica during the Civil War. Innocent men, women, and children who had nothing to do with the war were killed, and much of the town was razed to the ground. Guernica is a tribute to Picasso's romance with monochrome. It's an oil on canvas, but it is in black and white. And it is arguably the greatest anti-war painting in history. The gorilla wrestles with the Superman. The gorilla wrestles with the Superman. The line is a remarkably accurate description of the conflict between the black man, the native and the white man. The gorilla is the native. The gorilla is a great ape, native to the tropical forests of Africa. To wrestle means to engage in a fight with. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, you have the story of Jacob wrestling with an angel. Genesis, book of Genesis. Superman, the white man is the Superman. Why is the white man called the Superman? Because in every conflict, ultimately, the white man won, the native lost. Be it in Africa, be it in Asia, be it in Kenya, be it in India. Superman is a man capable of doing things which are extraordinary, which are beyond the capacity of ordinary men, of the ordinary man. Why did it happen? The explanation is simple. The science and technology commanded by the white man was centuries ahead of the science and technology commanded by the native. That is why in every conflict the white man won, the native lost. Even the science of war, the science of modern warfare was unknown to the natives. Understandably, in every conflict the white man won, and the white man came to be known as the Superman. The gorilla wrestles with a Superman. The gorilla, as I said, is found in the tropical forests of Africa. At home in the forests of Africa, very much like the natives of Africa who lived a life in close communion with the environment, in close communion with nature. But the fact is that in every conflict, of course, there were exceptions. For example, in Kerala, in Travancore, there is the story of Travancore triumphing over the Dutch, the Battle of Kolachal. That's probably the only instance of a native power defeating a Western power, a colonial power in a sea battle. I remember reading the diaries of travelers to Mughal India, travelers to the Mughal Empire under Aurangzeb. They speak, for example, they speak of the greatness of the Mughal Empire, the glory of the Mughal Empire, the immense wealth, how the Mughal Empire is extremely populous, extremely wealthy, extremely powerful. And then they often observe a few thousand Western soldiers are sufficient to sweep the empire away in a matter of days. That is the sort of observation you find in the diaries of travelers, Western travelers to the Mughal Empire. Because even at that time, the science and technology commanded by the Mughals was way behind the science and technology commanded by the Western powers. Returning to the poem, the guerrilla engages in a fight with the Superman. The guerrilla stands for the native, the Superman for the white man. And the Superman is the Superman because he wins the fight. Not just that fight, every fight he engages, every fight he involves himself in. Now we come to two very poignant lines. I who am poisoned with the blood of both, where shall I turn, divided to the vein? That is the problem of the poet. Poisoned with the blood of both. The blood of Derek Walcott in real life was mixed. For example, very much mixed. For example, both his grandmothers were black, while both his grandfathers were white. I who am poisoned with the blood of both is the gorilla and the Superman, the black man and the white man, the native and the colonial. I who am poisoned with the blood of both, where shall I turn, divided to the vein? We find poets, writers, intellectuals, theorists, sociologists, political scientists attacking colonialism forcefully, violently, vehemently. But Derek Walcott is not able to do that because he realizes, he is aware that there is white blood in him. He cannot identify himself completely with the gorilla because he is partly the Superman. He cannot identify himself totally with the Superman because he is partly the gorilla. He is divided. And I feel that the greatness of the poetry of Walcott is rooted in this divided state, in this ambiguity, in this ambivalence, in this deeply self-contradictory condition. The speaker admits that he has cursed the drunken officer of British rule. This could be a reference to any officer carrying out the administration of the British Empire who was drunk. The white men who came to look after the numerous colonies of the British Empire were notorious for their hard drinking. When you are drunk, you are incapable of clear thinking. You are incapable of balanced action. You are even incapable of lucid articulation. This is how the officers of the British Empire were, by and large. They had drunk not merely whiskey, not merely scotch. but also the power that goes with being an officer of the British Empire. A better interpretation would be that the entire British administration is given concrete shape in a drunken officer, is personified, the British rule is personified as a drunken officer. And the poet has indeed cursed the British rule. How choose between this Africa and the English tongue I love? This is a key passage, not merely in the poem, but in the entire corpus of Walcott. Walcott's career as a poet, achievement as a poet, is predicated on this ambivalence. He is unable to make a choice between Africa from where his ancestors came, and the English language. He has repeatedly admitted that as a child, as a boy, as a young man, he was madly in love with the English language. These are his own words. I'm not paraphrasing it. Madly in love with the English language. And when he is asked to make a choice, he simply refuses to make a choice. On the one hand is Africa, from where his ancestors came, the continent which has decided the color of his skin, which has given him a partial African identity. On the other hand is the English language. You must remember that English is the official language of St. Lucia, the country to which Walcott belongs. That Walcott spent his early years reading and rereading the classics of English literature. That even today, St. Lucia is a parliamentary monarchy, and the monarch is Queen Elizabeth II. Betray them both or give back what they give. The speaker studies his options. He can betray them both. He can be disloyal to them. He can turn against them. He is what he is now because of two things, Africa and the English language. Should he turn against both of them? Or give back what they give? Or give to Africa what he has received from Africa and give to the English language what he has received from the English language? That would be too artificial. That would be too mechanical. This is not how human beings behave. Should he do that? Should he betray Africa and the English language, or give to Africa what he owes Africa and give to the English language what he owes the English language? As the poem moves towards its close, the poet, I think, tries to tilt the balance. There is a balance in the poem between Africa and the English language. Africa, the land from where his ancestors came, and the English language which facilitates the articulation of his dearest thoughts and feelings. No two things could be more different from each other. Africa, a continent. English, a language. Africa identified with the color black. English identified with the color white. Africa, the land of the gorilla. English, the land of the Superman. And at the center of these two things, at the middle of these two things is the speaker. But now I think he tilts the balance slightly in favor of Africa. For he says, how can I face such slaughter and be cool? What is happening in Africa? Slaughter, massacre, mass destruction, genocide. How can I face such slaughter and be cool? How can I turn from Africa and live? The poet cannot afford to ignore it. He cannot turn from Africa and live. So dear is Africa to his heart, though he may be far from Africa. Even if he has never ever visited Africa, Africa is inside him. Africa decides the color of his skin. Africa decides the nature of his hair. Africa decides his gene. Africa gives him his genetic identity. The poem may be a far cry from Africa, but the fact is that he cannot turn from Africa and live. It's a rhetorical question. How can I turn from Africa and live? It is not that the poet is in doubt and the poet wants an answer, and the poet expects the reader to provide an answer to this question. The poet has worded the statement in the form of a question for effect, in order to conclude the poem with a bang. How can I turn from Africa and live? Let us take a close look at the stylistic aspects of the poem. We have already discussed the title of the poem in some detail. Students frequently ask me whether A Far Cry from Africa is a free verse poem or a poem in traditional verse. I usually reply that it is a Walcott poem. Characteristically, it stands somewhere between free verse and traditional verse. There are strong elements of free verse in the poem, and also the presence of elements of traditional verse in the poem. For example, the poem is a rhyme scheme of sorts. For example, the poem is divided into stanzas, into 3 stanzas. But the first stanza consists of 10 lines, the second stanza of 11 lines, and the third stanza of 12 lines. As I have already pointed out, the poem has a rhyme scheme, but the rhyme scheme is chaotic. Examples of rhyming words in the first stanza include pelt, welt, flies, cries, dead, bed. Poetry can be meaning driven or image driven. The poems of Walcott in general, and A Far Cry from Africa in particular, are all meaning driven. But the poet chooses his images very carefully in order to ensure that the images lend a helping hand to the semantic content of the poem. And as extremely appropriate and extremely striking images are chosen, the imagery of the poem effortlessly pushes forward the semantic trajectory of the poem. We have images of violence, death, images borrowed from nature, from geography, from natural life, from wildlife. We have images specific to Africa, which succeed in rooting the poem to the geographical, political, social, cultural, economic, psychological soil of Africa. But we have also images drawn from outside the African continent, which ensure that the poem has a global aura. The strength of the poem, the greatness of the poem is that it is simultaneously local and global. The images ensure that, the imagery of the poem ensures that the poem is rooted in Africa and concomitantly has tremendous international global significance. The figure of speech called apostrophe is utilized in the opening stanza, where the worm cries, "Waste no compassion on these separate dead." And who is the worm? The kernel of carrion. The poet makes tremendously effective use of anaphora or repetition at the closure of the poem by making use of the words "how can I" twice. The words "how can I" are repeated in the penultimate line as well as in the last line. How can I? How can I? Similarly, the poet makes use of the literary device called the rhetorical question at the end of the poem. A rhetorical question is a statement which wears the garb of a question. A statement is converted into a question for the sake of effect. The rhetorical question does not require an answer, does not take an answer, because it's actually a statement. Look at the last two lines of the poem. How can I face such slaughter and be cool? How can I turn from Africa and live? These are very powerful rhetorical questions which the poet asks, not in order to get an answer, but for the sake of effect. The diction is simple, everyday, appropriate, effective. The poet makes use of words like Kikuyu and Welt, which are Africa specific, giving the poem a local flavor. At the same time, he makes use of proper nouns like Spain, Jews, providing the poem with an international aura. This is something I'm never tired of repeating to my students. A far cry from Africa is a tree whose roots go deep into the soil, into the local cultural soil, into the soil of Africa, into the local cultural soil, and whose branches, whose highest branches, reach out to the sky of the world, to the international sky. Transferred epithet is the figure of speech in which the epithet or the adjective is transferred from one noun to another noun or attached to the second noun, not the first noun, because of the close association between the first noun and the second noun. Because of the close association between two nouns, the adjective which is usually attached to the first noun is transferred to the second noun. We meet with the figure of speech called transferred epithet at the close of the second stanza. The white peas. Peas can never be white or black, for that matter. White man. The peas created by the white man. The peas so closely associated with the white man that the epithet white detaches itself from man and attaches itself to peace. And the peace comes to be known as the white peas. The poet makes repeated use of pathetic fallacy, the figure of speech in which human attributes, intentions, responses are given to non human entities, animals, plants, inanimate objects, abstract concepts. Look at the first line of the first stanza of the poem. Your wind is ruffling. To ruffle means to disorder, to disarrange by running one's hand or one's fingers through something. It's usually human beings who do it. But here, a wind is ruffling. A classic example of the figure of speech called pathetic fallacy. The worm in line 5 of stanza 1, which cries, is a second example. Only the worm, kernel of carrion, cries. Line 7 of stanza 1, statistics justify. Usually human beings justify. Here, statistics justify. The 8th line and the 9th line of the second stanza of stanza 2. His wars dance to the titan carcass of a drum. His wars dance. Finally, we come to the third stanza. There is a powerful, pathetic fallacy in the opening lines of the stanza. Brutish necessity wipes its hands upon the napkin. An excellent example of the pathetic fallacy. In the present poem, Walcott uses enjambment quite frequently. Enjambment is the flow of sense and sound beyond the frontier of a line or a stanza. It gives the poem greater technical cohesion because where there is enjambment, the lines fuse together, the stanzas fuse together. I shall give you just 3 examples. We meet with enjambment at the opening of the first stanza. Tawny pelt of Africa. Thus, the first line flows smoothly into the second line. We meet with enjambment again at the opening of the second stanza. Break in a white dust. Break in a white dust. The first line of the second stanza flows into the second line of the second stanza. The final example is from the opening of the third stanza. Hands upon the napkin. Here again, the first line of the third stanza smoothly, effortlessly flows into the second line of the third stanza. Put very simply, a symbol is something which stands for something else. A far cry from Africa is drenched in symbolism. We shall try to identify the most important symbols used in the poem here. They are the wind, the worm, hunting, the ibis, the gorilla, the Superman. I think we have 5 symbols. The first symbol that we meet with is the wind. At the very beginning of the poem, the wind here is ruffling to the tawny pelt of Africa. The wind stands for forces of disorder because that is precisely what it does here. The wind is disordering, disorganizing the pelt. It's ruffling the pelt of Africa. The wind stands for disorder, forces of disorder. The wind stands for war. The wind stands for disruption. The wind stands for uprising. The wind stands for violence. We must remember that the poem begins with the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya, which took place in the 1950s in Kenya. The worm stands for complete destruction, putrefaction, rotting, corruption, immorality, the nothingness in which everything that is alive in this world has to end. Death. What happens to the body after death? Hunting. Hunting stands for colonialism itself. It's a very perfect symbolism for the colonial exercise. That precisely is what colonialism did. The colonial power is the hunter. The native is the hunted. Hunting stands for the cruelty, the sadism, the violence that is ingrained in the human psyche. That is part of the Western civilization, and that was brought to the colonized countries by the colonial powers. The ibis is a symbol rich in history, rich in mythology, rich in culture. The ibis is a sacred bird in the Egyptian religion, in several African religious cults. The ibis stands for the sacred, for harmony, for wisdom, for knowledge, for writing, for survival, for determination, for nature itself. I think the ibis stands for Africa itself. What can be a better symbol for the African continent than the ibis, which is found in most parts of the continent, or which was found in most parts of the continent. The gorilla stands for the native, the colonized. The gorilla is a great ape, native to the tropical forests of Africa. The black man in Africa led a life in close communion with nature, like the gorilla. He was at home in the forest, like the gorilla. The Superman stands for the white man. In every fight between the Superman and the gorilla is defeated, the Superman wins. The Superman is the white man, the colonizer. And the Superman is the Superman because of the very advanced science and technology he commands. Because the science and technology he commands is centuries ahead of the science and technology commanded by the native, who is aptly, appropriately, felicitously symbolized through the symbol of the gorilla. The issue of meta is rather complex. I've been studying it for quite some time. The single most important meter used in the poem is the iambic meter, and frequently it's iambic pentameter. The poet also uses other meters such as trauke and anapist. Alliteration is the repetition of the same consonant sounds in words which do not occur far from one another or each other. We meet with several instances of alliteration in the poem where the same consonant sound or two or more very similar consonant sounds are repeated in words close together. Batten upon the bloodstreams. Colonel of Carrion cries. Scholars cease. Betray them both. Similarly, assonance is the repetition of the same vowel sound in words which do not occur far from each other or one another. We come across several instances of assonance where the same vowel sound or very similar vowel sounds are repeated in words which occur close together. Worm, kernel, white, child, white, ibis, cries. The simile is the figure of speech in which an open comparison, an explicit comparison is established between two objects. We can identify quite a few powerful similes in this poem. For example, at the very beginning of the poem, stanza 1, line 2, the poet says, I quote from memory, Kikuyu, quick as flies, batten upon the bloodstreams of the veldt. In the well, in the open African country, there are streams. But now we find blood streams, streams in which instead of water, blood flows. And you must remember that we are in the middle of the Mau uprising. And the Kikuyu, the most important ethnic group in Kenya, the most populous ethnic group in Kenya, is battening, feeding gluttonously, prospering at the expense of the Kikuyu, quick as flies. They're as quick as flies. When there is some blood, when there is a dead body, when there is anything which can be fed on by a fly, you find the fly there. The fly needs no time to reach its food. And its food is usually something which is rotting, something which is dirty. The domestic fly, symbol of everything that is dirty, everything that is rotting, everything that smells bad. And the fly is very quick to reach its food destination. The Kikuyu are as quick as flies to exploit the bloodstreams of the veldt, to drink from the bloodstreams of the veldt. And you must understand that they are drinking the blood of their fellow human beings. Sometimes it might be the white men. Sometimes it might be the black men who side with the white men. Be that as it may, the Kikuyu tribesmen are battering upon the bloodstreams of the veldt with the quickness, with the speed, with the sense of direction of the flies. Let us take a close look at stanza 2, line 8. Delirious as these worried bees. The poet establishes an explicit parallel, an open comparison between man, upright man as he puts it, and the bees in the forest. Just as the bees in the forest engage in violence, take part in fights, kill each other or one another, man also does so during war. And during war he is as delirious as these hungry bees, which attack their prey with ferocity. Delirium is a state of the mind in which the person becomes incapable of clarity in thought, sustained action, even coherent speech. Man, the so-called upright man engaged in war, is as delirious as a hungry beast, and hence as violent, as ferocious, as cruel as a hungry wild animal. We now come to stanza 3, line 3. A waste of our compassion as with Spain. The poet establishes an explicit parallelism between what took place in Spain during the Civil War and after, and what is now happening in Africa in the context of the Mau uprising. As with Spain, all the compassion that was poured into Spain from various quarters in the world, all the international support, all the emotion, all the compassion, all the pity, all the sympathy, all the identification with the suffering in Spain went waste. The Spanish Civil War ended with the victory of the fascists. The Second Republic was overthrown, and the Spanish state, fascist Spanish state, came into being. And Francisco Franco was proclaimed Caudillo of Spain. And the fascist state, in turn, led to further mass murders, further oppression, further suppression of all dissent. Just as all the compassion that was poured into Spain in the context of the Spanish Civil War was wasted. All the compassion that is now being poured into Africa in the context of the Mau uprising is also going waste. This is a very striking simile, a simile which no ordinary poet would have created. which only a poet of the stature of Derek Walcott would have created. Because not only is the simile felicitous, not only is the simile appropriate, it gives the poem an international aura. I've said it before, an international aura. And the poet establishes that the things that happen in Africa, the terrible things that happen in Africa, the terrible, terrible things that happen in Africa, do not happen in Africa alone. They happen all over the world because that is the basic human nature. Elsewhere in the poem, he speaks of man, human being, in the sense of human being. It is not the white man or the black man or the yellow man or the brown man who behaves in this particular fashion, but man. Not just in Africa do we come across these unspeakable horrors. We come across these unspeakable horrors in Spain as well. That's just another example. And Spain is a European country. Is a European country. Even in Europe, even in Spain, the same thing, almost the same thing happened. And all our compassion was wasted. One of the fundamental strengths of poetry is the use of metaphorical language. A metaphor is a figure of speech in which a comparison is established between two things, but the comparison is not clearly stated. The comparison is implicit, not explicit. When something is described in the terms of something else, it's a metaphor. There are quite a few powerful metaphors in the poem under discussion. Take a close look at the very opening lines of the poem. Stanza 1, lines 1 and 2. The wind is ruffling through the tawny belt of Africa. Tawny belt of Africa. Immediately we are compelled to imagine Africa as an animal with a pelt, with skin and fur, with skin and hair. And we are transported in our imagination to the rich tropical forests of Africa with its exotic wildlife. Or take a look at stanza 1, line 4. Scattered through paradise. That's precisely what Africa is from the perspective of the poet. Let us go further down to stanza 3, the opening lines. Wipes its hands upon the napkin of a dirty cause. Lines 1 and 2 of stanza 3. The dirty cause is a napkin. A napkin of the napkin of a dirty cause. The dirty cause is metaphorized in the form of a napkin. I would like to wrap up the discussion by observing that if you look carefully into the poem for a long time, you will find Walcott there. You will find Derek Walcott there. I have not lost my marbles. I have not gone bonkers. This is the archetypal Walcott poem. Is it a free verse poem? It is a free verse poem. The diction, the linear length suggests that it's a free verse poem. Is it a poem in traditional verse? It is a poem in traditional verse. It has a rhyme scheme, but the rhyme scheme is chaotic. It has a stanzaic pattern, but the stanzaic pattern is irregular. It has a meter, but the meter keeps changing. What about the stand taken by the speaker in the poem? Of course, he is opposed to colonialism. It is the arrival of colonialism that has made Africa what it is today, that is responsible for making Africa a far cry from Africa. At the same time, he is more than willing to call out the havoc wreaked by the natives. He presents the Kikuyu as flies battening upon the bloodstreams of the veldt. It is not merely the white man who is responsible for the pathetic state of the continent today. The natives are equally responsible. And when a white child is hacked in bed, the speaker's heart goes out to the child. The speaker empathizes with the child. As he says towards the end of the poem, he cannot reject Africa. At the same time, his language is English, the language of the colonizer. And you must remember that as a child, as a boy, as a young man, Derek Walcott was madly in love with the English language. And his achievement as a writer, as a poet, as a dramatist is largely the product of this crazy romance with the language of the colonizer. What is remarkable about this poem is the ambiguity, the ambivalence, the refusal to take sides, the willingness to see both sides of the coin, which is characteristically Walcott. As I said, this is the archetypal Walcott poem. And if you want to see Derek Walcott, you must spend a lot of time looking carefully into this remarkable poem.